afternoon, and Kumbadaru, Kumbadaru, which is good day, it's good to see you, and that's in Barragun, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. And 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages, so it's certainly an opportunity for us here at State Library to profile the significant work that we've done in collecting, documenting, preserving and making accessible the traditional languages of Queensland. So we're trying to incorporate language into our everyday. So that's why I've welcomed you in Barragun. So my name is Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you today. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay respects to the ancestors who came before them. So State Library is actually located on Kirulpa Point, which is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition today and every day of the year. And I know that you probably have been here over the last 5 years as State Library has commemorated the centenary anniversary of the First World War through the Q ANZAC 100 project. It has certainly been a deeply rewarding initiative. Q ANZAC 100 has given us the opportunity to uncover new knowledge and showcase precious First World War treasures from our collections. With the help of Queenslanders everywhere, we have brought to life unknown stories from this tumultuous period in our history through exhibitions, symposiums and workshops both here at State Library and through the regions of Queensland. Our fellowship program has been a valuable part of our Q ANZAC 100 initiative. Since 2015, 12 Q ANZAC 100 Fellows have examined the Queensland experience during the World Wars. They have researched censorship and conscription and shone a light on the little-known stories of strong women who played a big part in the war effort overseas and on the home front. Fellows have also investigated the lasting effects of war on returned soldiers and searched for ways to understand the war experience while honouring those who lived through it. Some stories have been inspiring and some have been sobering, but they've all been thought-provoking. So here at State Library, we inspire possibilities through knowledge, stories and creativity. And the work from these final 4 Q ANZAC 100 Fellows embodies this vision. Alain Acworth's research into the Australian Women's Army Service personnel will culminate in what promises to be a poignant audio theatre piece. Dr. Anastasia Dukova's work will connect the histories of the men who left active duty with the Queensland Police Force to their stories of war service. Dr. Martin Kirby's project will take a close look at the sentiment expressed in letters, diaries, newspaper articles and commemorative events. And Deborah Terranova will investigate the experiences of Queensland women during the Second World War through a multicultural lens with a focus on those women who deemed enemy aliens. Each of the Q ANZAC 100 Fellows has provided new information and interpretations of Queensland's history. Through the Q ANZAC 100 project is now in its final year, and I guess in its final months, it will leave certainly a lasting legacy for Queenslanders. The incredible work of our fellows will be a resource for future generations to understand the realities and impacts of war. As custodian of the state's shared memory, State Library is uniquely positioned to preserve and make accessible this knowledge for the years to come. One way will be through the curation of permanent historical installations as part of the Anzac Square restoration project. So if you go to the Anzac Square in the coming months, you'll see the galleries that we've been working on to continue to tell the story of the First World War, but also World War II and post-World War II. So I thank all of our fellows for their commitment and hard work over the past 5 years. Standing here reflecting on the wartime sacrifices of Queenslanders, I am reminded how fortunate we are today. And I'm very proud of our collective effort to recognise the people and history of the war experience in Queensland. There will always be new stories to discover about this period, and it is my hope that all Queenslanders, whether they are researchers or not, will always know that the State Library is a place to start. I apologise in advance that I can't stay for the whole session. I can stay for the first 45 minutes, but I'm certain it will be an inspiring session, and as the fellows share their research outcomes. This afternoon, Gavin Bannerman, who's the Director of Queensland Memory, will be facilitating the conversation, so I invite Gavin to come up now. So thank you and enjoy the afternoon.
Thanks so much, Vicky. Yes, my name's Gavin Bannerman. I'm the Director of Queensland Memory here at State Library, and it's my pleasure to be involved with afternoons like this. I think this is really the culmination of some of the hard work and the research, and it's when that fellow who's been in the reading room, has been working with collections, gets to tell and share and get excited about all the material they've been working with in our collection. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be filming and photographing today's event, so just to make you aware, if you have any issues with that, if you could just make yourself known to myself or Mary Kievsky. Mary is around. She'll put her hand up and she'll make herself known. So just for your information, we are recording this event for Queensland's memory. Also, we have an intermission. Getting very theatrical with today, so there will be a just to keep in with Elaine's performance. We will be having afternoon tea on the platform between level 2 and 3. So we'll show you where that is. So I will now introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Anastasia Dukova. Anastasia is an adjunct fellow at Griffith University Centre for Social and Cultural Research. Previously, she has held previous fellowships at the Griffith Criminology Institute and the University of Toronto. Have I said that right? You don't say Toronto, apparently. It's Toronto, Canada. She's also a policing historian specialising in the history of urban policing in Ireland, Australia and Canada throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. And is particularly interested in the impact of Irish policing experience on the development of colonial policing models, both state and municipal. Anastasia's project, Queensland Police and the Great War Effort, seeks to connect the police and war service stories and histories of the men who left the Queensland Police Force active duty to volunteer in the Australian Imperial Forces from 1914 to 1918. Please welcome Anastasia.
"2018 marked the centenary of the end of the Great War. A variety of commemorative projects have celebrated the lives of men and women who volunteered in the Australian Imperial Force and those who provided support on the home front here in Australia. Among these were over 100 Queensland policemen who volunteered, but for the most part remain lost to public knowledge. Utilizing a vast array of primary sources, domestic and overseas, Queensland Police and the Great War Effort connects personal, police, war, service stories and histories of these men who left the Queensland Police Force active duty to volunteer in the AIF between 1914 and 1918. An estimated total of 128 policemen applied for leave from police duty to volunteer to fight in the First World War. 105 were granted leave, 5 men who applied were refused due to personnel shortages, and 17 men resigned their positions to enlist. 30 policemen paid the ultimate price and died in action. This project focuses on 5 men from each of 3 categories. Constables Patrick Joseph Devine and James Kasane were granted leave to join Australian Imperial Force. They volunteered before the October 1915 memorandum by the Commissioner of the Queensland Police, Cahill. Both men were originally from Ireland. Since its inception in 1863 and until 1930, Ireland was a key source of recruits for the Queensland Police Force. The peak came in the 1880s, where 61% of recruits listed Ireland as their country of birth. By the 1910s, the number had fallen to just under a quarter. Candidates with previous service with the Irish Constabulary, urban police such as the Dublin Metropolitan Police, or any other military or law enforcement service were actively sought out by the colonial forces. Devine was born into a large Catholic family on 17th of March 1886 in Kilkenny, Ireland. He lived together with his parents, Patrick and Elizabeth, or Liza, his grandmother Mary, who was at the time of 1911 census was 82, and 7 siblings out of 9, and a young niece who was 5. The family was well educated. His father was a postmaster, and his mother, originally from Dublin City, was a district midwife. Patrick worked as a rural postman. In 1908, aged 22, Patrick Devine left his home county and joined the Royal Irish Constabulary. Following 5 years of service, in October 1913, he resigned from the RIC to immigrate to Australia. And it even shows here on the record to join the Australian Police Force. He was sworn into the Queensland Police Force on 11th of February 1914. The Register of Members of the Queensland Police Force for Queensland describes Patrick as 5 feet 11 inches and quarter inches tall, measuring 37 inches across chest, of fresh complexion with blue eyes and dark hair. Sorry, wrong button. He should be a third in a row, but they look a little bit alike. Patrick was stationed at the traffic office, Roma Street. And here's his other guys. The military record shows Patrick enlisted in the AIF on 25th of June 1915. In October 1915, Lieutenant Devine embarked on HMAT Sang Bay and left Australia for Suez. Following a Gallipoli campaign, Lieutenant Devine in 1916 joined 9th Infantry Battalion, was wounded in Pozières, Somme, France. And proceedings of medical board indicate that Patrick came to suffer shell shock. And here are the signatures of men before they embarked, and you can see his signature here. The circumstance of the injury specified that he was blown up and unconscious for half an hour, carried on until next day, then collapsed. He went on to suffer from headaches, dreams, and tremors. In October 1916, the Medical Board, Australian Military Offices in London, found that Lieutenant Devine was still suffering from shell shock. Patrick described that he was nervous and insomniac, sleeps badly, dreams, and has no appetite. On 19th of February 1917, though still suffering from shell shock, Devine was found fit for general duty. On 3rd of November, Patrick was killed in action by a bullet through the head in Passchendaele. He died in the field hospital in Belgium. Eva Mary Devine of 4 Brighton Buildings, Terrier Road, Dublin, was listed as the next of kin. Patrick and Eva Marie Bethel got married while he was on leave near the end of 1916 in South Dublin. And like millions of mothers and widows, Eva Mary received an envelope shown here notifying her of her husband's sacrifice to the Great War. James Kasane was another Irishman. Kasane was born on 1st of April 1889 in County Kerry, Ireland, to John Michael and Catherine Cronin, she won by Katie. Like Patrick, he also came from a large farming Catholic family and lived with the youngest sister Lizzie, 2 older sisters Mary and Nora, and 3 brothers, Patrick, John, and Richard. Their farm was extensive and contained 7 buildings: a stable, a calf house, dairy, piggery, a fowl house, and a barn. The farmstead also had a servant, Pat Sheehan. I've never seen that before in my research. Kasane departed from London to Brisbane on Oswestry Grange, Queensland Line on 18 January 1911. Supernumerary Kasane was sworn into the Queensland Police Force in July 1911. He was 22 and 3 months old at the time. The Queensland Police Register describes James as 5 feet 11 inches tall, so very much like Patrick, with brown eyes and hair and a fair complexion. His religion is listed as Roman Catholic and previous calling as a labourer. The majority of recruits were younger sons of farmers, semi-skilled workers, and labourers. As a rule, the term labourer covered a wide range of employment, predominantly unskilled and often rural work sector. Between 1911 and 1915, Constable Kasane received 3 transfers. He was stationed at Ciliary for nearly a year, Toowoomba for a month, and finally Inglewood. The Queensland Police Gazette shows Kasane made 8 arrests with successful convictions in 1915, followed with a custodial sentence of defendant. The offences ranged from stealing to fraud and obtaining goods or money under false pretenses. On 2nd of September 1915, aged 26, Kasane volunteered in the Australian Imperial Force. He was soon promoted to the rank of 2nd lieutenant. He was single and listed his brother Patrick as next of kin. Kasane was assigned to 11th Machine Gun Company, left Australia on 8th of June 1916. In February 1917, he was transferred to 3rd Division of British Expeditionary Forces. Following a brief period in Pelham Downs, in England, Kasane was taken on strength to 9th Machine Gun Company attached to 3rd Division. On September 7th, he proceeded to France. At the beginning of 1918, he was granted leave, a brief leave to Ireland, so he went home. On 18th of January 1918, Kasane was awarded a military cross. His Majesty the King has been pleased to confer the undermentioned reward for gallantry and distinguished service in the field, for the conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty when in charge of the company's transport establishing a large ammunition dump just behind the forward barrage position. He successfully maintained the supply of ammunition during a critical period despite heavy fire and most difficult conditions. In March 1918, Kasane was admitted to the General Hospital with the septic right hand. A month later, he was invalidated to the United Kingdom. In August, he was readmitted to the hospital with the injury, this time to the Australian Auxiliary Hospital. The number 1 Australian Auxiliary Hospital was situated in Harefield Park, Harefield, Middlesex, and was used as a home for convalesce for wounded soldiers of the Australian Imperial Forces during the First World War. Following a fortnight at the hospital, Kasane was seconded for duty with Machine Gun Training Depot. 9 months later, he returned to Australia. On October 11th, 1919, Second Lieutenant of AIF, his appointment was terminated. Kasane returned to Brisbane and on 12th of September 1919, resumed police duty. You will notice there's an overlap, but he returned to Australia before his appointment was officially terminated. He resigned from Queensland Police at the end of March 1920, less than a year after his reappointment. In 1921, he proceeded to take up a full-time paid position of the Queensland Irish Association Secretary. He remained in this role until 1924. At that time, tension between Empire Loyalists and Irish nationalists were at high level, and Irish Catholics were under suspicion. Kasane's appointment as secretary would have been strategic. The Irish War of Independence was still waging. James married Mary Agnes O'Driscoll, a daughter of Kate Mary Cecilia Hayes and Andrew O'Driscoll, the Queensland Police Inspector, according to the rites of the Roman Catholic Church, on July 10, 1922, in Dara on Gotha Street in Fortitude Valley. Dara was the seat of the Archbishop of Brisbane at the time. Kasane resigned from his role of secretary in 1924, and upon his resignation from the QIA, he was presented with the watch for his service. Membership of the QIA numbers peaked in 1925 at 815 members, but only men born in Ireland or male descendants of Irish-born parents were admitted, regardless of their confession. The Elizabeth Street premises tower house, purchased by the club in 1919 for £11,000, attracted regular popularity and used for a variety of events and functions. The house has been redeveloped in recent years, so it no longer looks like that. Kasane went on to work as insurance inspector. The family lived in 8 Cordelia Street in South Brisbane. Kasane died at Mater Hospital in October 1953 from complications from cancer and heart failure. The obituary indicates he was survived by his children, John Andrew, Catherine Mary, and James Morgan, and grandchildren. Queensland Police and the Great War Effort showcases these untold stories of men sworn to protect our communities and our nation, such as Constable Devine and Constable Kasane, among many others. This in-depth research into these featured policemen connects professional and family stories of these men who were prominent community members and soldiers, but also husbands, fathers, sons, and migrants. Many men who returned and resumed their duties with the Queensland Police went on to have long careers, in some cases their children carrying on their policing legacy. For full personal and service histories of these policemen, please visit QANZAC100police.com.au. And I would just like to add my gratitude to the Queensland Police Museum for their invaluable research support for this project. Thank you.
I'll introduce you. Thanks so much, Anastasia. I'll also just reminds me to give a bit of a plug to our blogs, the John Oxley blog and the First World War blog that State Library hosts, which all of our fellows contribute their stories through text as well. So if you want to dig a little deeper or find a little more out, the blogs are a good place to find that information. Now I'd just like to introduce our second speaker before our afternoon tea break. It's Alain Acworth. She might be a familiar face to a few of you. She's been writing for performance for more than 20 years, with a small break, it says here in the bio, in the middle for the birth and early years of her son and a return to higher education. Her work has been critically and popularly awarded and has been performed both by main house and independent sectors within Australia and internationally, including the Queensland Theatre Company, the Sydney Theatre Company, Wildwood in Canberra, La Mama in Melbourne, Comédie Française, Hackney Theatre Studio, London and Edinburgh Festival. It's quite a CV. So in 2015, Elaine was awarded the first Q ANZAC Fellowship for her audio piece My Father's Wars, which is available as a podcast, and I encourage anybody to listen to that. It's an incredible story, and you just keep casting your mind back to the date ranges and the spans, and it's just an incredible story, and I think it's one of the true legacies of the Q ANZAC project. But Elaine's second Q ANZAC Fellowship in 2018, Put Out into the Deep, seeks to develop an audio theatre piece around Australian Women's Army Service personnel. In 1942, these women intercepted, deciphered and decoded encrypted Japanese military messages, thus providing vital intelligence to the Australian war effort. I look very forward to this. I introduce Alain Acworth. Thanks.
Hi everyone. This lovely lady is Helen O'Leary, who's a terrific actor and will be reading some of the material, some of the scenes with me as we go on. Okay, there isn't a PowerPoint presentation, it's just me talking and us acting. In July of 1943, the forces of the Imperial Japanese Army were slowly being beaten back along the Kokoda Track. They were displaced from their strongholds on the north coast of New Guinea. As the war moved northward, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander, Southwest Pacific Area, moved his headquarters from Melbourne up to Brisbane, basically taking up residence in Lennon's Hotel in Queen Street. We already had the US Army and Navy with us, but of course with him came his general staff and also his not-so-general team, Central Bureau. Central Bureau were the inter-allied ultra-secret signals intelligence organisation he'd caused to be formed the previous year. They were tasked with the interception, decoding and analysis of secure enemy transmissions in the Southwest Pacific. And by September, they had taken up residence in 21 Henry Street, Ascot, the building most of you probably know as Narambla. The enormous panic of an imminent mainland invasion of Australia by Japanese forces had quietened since 1942, but we were still a country at war. Every enterprise was geared to supporting the war effort. Austerity marches and drives were held. War bonds were issued. 100,000 smackers to smack the Japs was a headline that often featured across the banners of newspapers. Factories were refitted for war construction. Armies of civil construction corps men created roads, rails, port facilities, army camps that had not existed 18 months before. Manpower relocated men and women not in designated essential services to work around the country. Rationing grew tighter, 6 grams of butter per person per day, desperate meat shortages in Brisbane, hundreds queuing outside butchers. A new handkerchief cost a cotton ration token and a half. And the reason I know this is because Joan Peters, née Taylor, told me so. Joan was a young nurse in the General Brisbane Hospital from 1941 to 1944, and she told me all of that. She kept war diaries for each of those years, tiny leather-bound books that she could slip into a skirt pocket, about yay big and yay thick. She didn't take a note of personal events in her life, she noted the events of the war. So these diaries became a kind of intimate timeline, one person's understanding of what was happening in the world around them. It was Joan's diaries that told me that on May 1st, Jap subs were off the east coast and threatened sea lanes from America. On May 4th, the Brisbane Line inquiry made headlines and strikes threatened US war output. On the 5th, 238 typhoid cases were reported in Melbourne. and 280 people were rounded up in Sydney restaurants, socialites caught in manpower's net. On the 14th, the Japanese submarine sank the marked hospital ship Centaur. All but 30 of the men and one nursing sister, brackets, Sister Savage, close brackets, drowned. And 16 patients were brought to Jones Hospital and admitted at about 2 a.m. that night into Ward 9. Makes it very personal suddenly, doesn't it? All the while, of course, the northern perimeter of the country was still under attack. Air raids on Darwin and Townsville, and in the north, Jap subs sinking shipping along the eastern and western seaboards, midget submarines in Sydney Harbour the previous year, and with the sinking of the Centaur off Fraser Island, demands to avenge the nurses. Australia and Australians were at risk, and the country knew it. Desperately unprepared to sustain itself on a wartime footing in 1939, and with most of its fighting men in European and African theatres of war until 1942, the country felt its vulnerability. And this was especially so in Queensland, as accusations of the Brisbane line were made by a Labor minister against the former Menzies government, and repeated and not at first denied by Prime Minister Curtin, though Menzies himself refuted it. So all of this forms and informs the world of the drama. Helen and I are going to read a short scene. Claire, our protagonist here in Brisbane, the young AWAS officer, is calling her home in Sydney, which is a very big thing at the time. If you remember, most units only had one phone in the building, and if houses had them, they were very well off. I'm playing Claire's mother. Helen is playing two characters, Dottie, her younger sister, and Claire herself, when Claire very infrequently gets a word in edgewise. So I hope this is going to be clear. How are you, darling? Are you all right? That newsreel had columns of tanks being hauled through Brisbane. That's not you, is it? You're not there. You're not near there, are you?
No, Mum, they're not firing at her. Here, give it to me. Claire, tell me about the Yanks. They look like a bit of all right. You're going to be a war bride? No, of course not. Why? Why not? You're just as good as these other girls. Don't waste your chances. Get out of this place. Gary Cooper was in Brisbane a few days ago. Did you see him? Did you get his autograph? Slow down, Dottie. No, I didn't. I can't believe it's you in Brisbane and not me. I'd make much better use of your chances.
You're 16, Miss Flibbity Gibbet.
A GI told me. Girls get married at 14 where I'm from.
And where exactly were you speaking about that to GIs, Missy? Here, give me the phone. We're not done with this, Dorothy Graham. Claire, can't you get posted back here? This Brisbane line business has me very wound up. I don't want you up there if the government is proposing to abandon half the country to the Japs.
They're not, Mum. Curtin's against it, Mum.
Well, he says that now, dear.
He is, Mum, honest.
But needs must when the devil drives. They're still on the doorstep. This could all turn on a sixpence.
Mum, the Jap Armada has been smashed at Empress Augusta Bay. It's on the news. We're driving them from their outposts. They're retreating, not invading. Here, give it me. Claire, hear about the cows that got nabbed? What cows that got nabbed? By Manpower. Manpower nabbed some cows. What? Yep. Raid at the Dorsey Club. 238 socialites were told they had to start work at the Knackers or the shoe factory making soldiers' boots. That'll fix them lazy cows.
Language, please, Dottie, please. Oh, here's your father, Claire. So that's the end of that scene. Geoffrey Ballard, on Ultra Secret Service, his memoirs of working at Central Bureau, notes the variety of political opinion within the organisation, everything from communist through to absolute strong right centrist views. But on this subject, the idea of the Brisbane line, there was a general dismay at the idea that Australians should abandon any part of their country, that the Australian fighting man would Welsh on that fight. This was completely unacceptable, a cause of great swearing and anger. Now, as you probably know, the August 43 federal election saw Curtin and Labor win by a landslide. So as a result of this and everything else that was happening, young Australian women filled roles traditionally ascribed to men and joined the armed forces or their auxiliary services in the tens of thousands. Amongst those young women were members of the AWAS, the Australian Women Army Service, who trained as signallers and interceptors at Bonegilla in Victoria and became Kana interceptors at Central Bureau at a variety of locations, including Kalinga Camp in 1943. There were WAF interceptors for Central Bureau as well, but the first of these was stationed primarily in North Queensland, Townsville's number 1 wireless unit at Roseneath, for example. So they weren't physically relocated to Central Bureau in Brisbane until 1944. And that didn't suit my dramatic storyline at all. Not because there was anything wrong with the young women or their work or the stories they could tell, which were fascinating. I just needed them to have been in Brisbane in 1943. Why? Because I haven't numbered my pages. Hang on. Because drama is about subtext and context. It's about setting up a series of apparently completely opposed or irreconcilable circumstances. It's about how people operate under those kinds of pressures, how they maneuver, compromise, negotiate, or not, how they realize themselves for good or ill. So why 43? Because in 43 the mainland would still have felt threatened. The seacoast certainly still did. Attacks on the coast were ongoing. But also, by 1943, these interceptors were experienced, practiced. They knew their job and were confident in what they knew. Jean Hillier's memoir, No Medals in This Unit, speaks of being able to identify a familiar Japanese operator by his fist, his particular sending style and quirks. This was going to be an important ability for my main character to have. At one point, early in the play, we hear an internal monologue from Claire. She's dialing through frequencies, looking for a Japanese signaller who has just switched frequencies, something they did often to make interception harder. So Helen's reading Claire.
Oh, no you don't. Her hand is warm on my shoulder. I turn.
All right there?
Raboul's a bloody chookhouse, Sergeant.
Well, so long as we're cock of the walk signal, Sig Graham, off you go.
Come on. Come on, my little red-combed chickadee, my little oriental chatterbomb. Come back to Claire. I'm not saying it out loud. Of course I'm not. Not any of it. Just thinking it. Well, not really thinking it. More a kind of mental reaching out into the dark.
The other sounds fade as the young woman zeroes in on the message she needs. Di-di-da, di-di-da-da, di-di.
There you are. There's nothing else. Only this. Only him and me across thousands of miles. It's Dancing Man. I know his hand on the key and he's crazy quick. Jive feet quick. And he thinks he's alone, talking to one of his own. And he is. Just not only that.
A final stream of dots and dashes.
Yes, I have you, Dancing Man. I have you forward and backward, up and down. I have you where you are and where you're going. Going, Honourable Japanese 8th Area Army Man. What did that say? That preamble. Do I know that? Jesus Christ, I bloody know that.
I really needed to number these pages, didn't I? Okay, yes. Also, by then, experienced operators were able to pick up and identify certain phrases, place names, call signs. Jeff Ballard, Jean Hillier, Doug Pyle, all Central Bureau interceptors and analysts or traffic analysts have all attested to this in their published memoirs. Regarding the phrases they recognised, the Japanese had so many codes, and some were more complex than others. The day-to-day codes between units, the tactical codes, were broken in the first half of the war on both sides. Yes, the codes were updated very frequently, but they were pretty easily broken again. The thing was, it kind of didn't matter because the tactical codes were used by people who weren't the professional signallers. They were used for communication between working units, for messages that needed to have an immediate impact. So it might be an aircrew radioing a landing field or a squadron HQ. It might be an advanced field checking into a unit base for orders. And sometimes these troops just didn't use, they used plain Kana code, so they didn't actually encode the messages that they were sent because the messages were going to be acted on immediately. It didn't matter if the enemy could hear it, if it was something that would already have happened by the time they could take action. But our young women would recognise these words. Request for repeats of the information, mentions of the word danger or attack, the code sequence for query, what, was a dot-dash pattern that they came to recognise or repeat that. While in transcribing the Kana Morse into adapted English letters, the letters YL, you see it on a lot of them, were the symbol for the Kana for signing off. Hillier especially speaks of the language of the Kana code, of being able to follow the story through from beginning to end, intercepting a message, handing it over for analysis and decoding, which if it was in PL, plain language, or a known code, happened immediately. Knowing that intelligence gleaned was sent to the appropriate unit, information on an imminent air raid sent to the target unit and the defending squadron, and sometimes she said she would hear the Japanese final call, "We are under attack. We are under attack." And so the interceptors, the operators, would actually follow the story through from beginning to end, which is phenomenal to me. I can't imagine what that would have been like. So my plot involves a young AWAS interceptor stationed at Kalinga Base now, who intercepts a series of messages that lead her to infer that a Japanese submarine might be somewhere off Moreton Bay. So here's that scene. Claire speaking to her colleague Annie, whom I will play, as the shift members walk back to barracks at 3 a.m. at Kalinga Base. Outside on the road, army trucks trundle by, the clop of horses' hooves from delivery drays, the sounds of the night. Helen's reading Claire, and as I said, I'm Annie. Look, you're too good on set for them to lease you.
Just want to work traffic.
You're a Kana operator.
Well, that's all there was. Who knew there was traffic analysis?
Why can't you be happy with what you have?
I am.
Oh.
I am.
But you want to do more. All right. Tell me your theory. Oh, yes, of course you have a theory. When do you not have a theory? Why do you think it was a submarine?
That's what you'd hear at PT Cook, monitoring their navy and ground to air and subs. The subs would surface to send, and they'd have to run to dry. And you could hear the sound of that, the sound that it made on the set, if you knew what you were listening for.
And you heard that tonight?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Good spot. I mean, really very good spot, Clary. Well done.
But he should have gone quiet then. Not transmitted and given DF a chance to find him, but he didn't. He sent straight away. He was faint and short and uncertain. So, is he faint because he's distant or because he's low voltage? He doesn't need much juice because he's sending to someone close by. And if that's so, who is he sending to and what qualifies as close by to Brisbane? And how close is he to Brisbane then?
I see.
And why would a submarine, if he is a submarine, why would a submarine risk sending so close to surfacing when often they'd wait hours on that to avoid detection? It doesn't make any sense unless this is urgent, some unexpected catastrophe, or is it something imminent? Some imminent action about to be taken by the enemy, in which case the question of what is nearby to Brisbane becomes bloody paramount, wouldn't you agree? Or is he stupid? Or panicked about something, or I don't know. Annie, I don't know. There are too many unknowns, and I don't have enough messages coming in to narrow the options down. And now there's a whole new team taken over, and I won't be back on set for 18 hours, so God alone knows what I'm going to miss. The one hope is that he has scheduled call-ins, and we're on the same shift. Ugh, Jesus Christ almighty! Sorry. Annie's first Presbyterian. She takes blasphemy very seriously.
All right. Yes, I see. All right. We really do need to get you transferred to traffic analysis, don't we? Thank you very much.
Do you want to sit? We'll just do a Q&A. Do you want to stand? Did you want to come up as well? Yeah, I'll stand at the lectern. Sorry, Mary, I'm just changing things on the fly. So we've just got a quick section for about 10 minutes of Q&A and a bit of a panel discussion. And then we'll have afternoon tea after that. But I just probably wanted to kickstart the questions. And was there an American movie? There was an American movie about female code breakers recently, wasn't there? Am I inventing things?
I'm not sure. There's certainly been a number of American history books
Yep.
produced. Lisa Mundy wrote Code
Yep.
Girls.
Yep.
Are you thinking of they've made an American version of the Bletchley Circle?
Yeah.
I think in 2018. I don't know that it's arrived here yet.
Okay, right.
So two of the
It's starting soon. Yes.
Yes?
Advertised it on the ABC last
Right.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
So did you want to talk a little bit about the code breakers and what the nature of that work was like?
For me, like the thing, because I'm particularly interested in how women navigated that period and the expectations, social expectations around being a girl, being a woman, what you could do, what you couldn't do. And so there was one female code breaker operating out of in Central Bureau, and she worked on diplomatic codes with Professor Room. Her name was Judy Rowe. She, after the war, became the professor of mathematics at the University of Sydney, so she clearly a highly intelligent young woman. But I just often wonder how many great possible code breakers kind of simply never got the opportunity. But it was a really extraordinary organisation. So essentially, unless you were out in the field, in a field unit where the groups worked much more closely and tightly together and they were much more interdependent. There were the interceptors who actually took the messages. Then Donna, the dispatch writers, rode the messages as quickly as they could to Central Bureau, where traffic analysis had the job of looking only at the preambles. And from the preambles, they looked at who was sending, where it was being sent from, where it was being sent to, and they started to form patterns around how frequently certain messages were coming from certain groups to certain groups, what the actual relay system was. They worked out, traffic analysis worked out by examining preambles and the routing systems that were used in these preambles, because a message would come from one place to the next place, then to the next, then to the next. And they actually worked out the hierarchy and organization and structure of the Japanese military units by examining how those preambles worked. And they worked out where certain units were being shipped to and how they were being transferred by looking at the preambles and the groups that the messages were being sent to and from. And then the message was sent to cryptanalysis, so for decoding and deciphering. The Japanese both encoded and enciphered their messages, so particularly the high-level mainline codes that were used between command and various regional command centres. And they took a lot. They were patchworks and they changed frequently, and there are a few instances through the war where we found things. We found code books buried in that should have been burned. The Japanese army, the army order was always burn the code books if you're leaving station. But they were buried in a tin because in New Guinea, in the middle of the monsoon weather, it was almost impossible to get anything to burn. So they buried these particular code books in a tin in the middle of under a lot of mud. But an American GI with a mine detector, a minesweeper, found something, dug it up, and there was enormous excitement at Central Bureau when it was identified as a potential codebook and enciphering. So it was amazing. There's so many things to say. There's so much to talk about. I kind of don't know where to go, really.
Well, what about that? I mean, intelligence is obviously a big thing for police and
Yes.
for the military. Did you want to, and I know that we're going from a First World story and a Second World story interchangeably, but there is a connection between the two. Did you want to talk a little bit about intelligence in the research you've been finding, Anastasia?
None of my men worked in intelligence that I've seen so far. I know from other research that police were interceptors in some of the remote stations. I have seen signal codes, I guess, with the lettering and stuff like that, that they were just matching the light signal to. It wasn't a sound, it was a light signal that I recall, but that's as far as I can contribute on that.
When you're doing research on those individual stories of, the men who came from Ireland and the police and then went to war, do you, I mean, it's interesting seeing Elaine, because she literally puts a voice to characters. Does that, as a researcher, do you ever get a voice for that person, or start to think what they might have sounded like, what they might have moved or acted like?
I only really get their physical appearance through the recruit registers, where it says, they were this tall, this broad, this color, eyes, that sort of complexion. I suppose where they're from can give you an imagined accent, but I more see their environments and their place within that environment, and how I have those snippets come together into almost like a motion picture. And that's why, I mean, that's probably one of the prime drives why I keep chasing these stories, these enactments almost. But it's quite hard, because none of these stories are particularly happy stories. And I found Devine's life trajectory particularly heartbreaking. Because, I mean, he obviously had a sweetheart in Ireland, and he probably immigrated to Australia so he could eventually get married. Because policemen in the RIC and Queensland policemen, they had to serve a particular time in the force. The rationale was that they save enough money so they could rent a house and furnish it and keep a wife and whatnot. Without getting into debt, because policemen couldn't be in debt, and they couldn't run businesses, they couldn't run pubs, none of that sort. And in the RIC, you had to wait 10 years before you apply for permission to marry. And if you get married without the permission, you get dismissed. So, but in Brisbane, it was 2 to 3 years. And having served for just, 2 years, he volunteered into the war. I went back, got married, went back to front, and got killed a few months later. And that was pretty much, that's the story. That's his life. And I don't know, I just find it, because I know all those intimate personal details of their service requirements and how much it impacted their lives, to have such almost an anticlimax is heartbreaking, and I think should be very much known, because that counteracts glamorization of war, and hopefully will one day prevent one. So
Fantastic.
that's how I view it.
That's fascinating. That notion that, and when it makes perfect sense, policemen couldn't be in debt.
No, because
They couldn't own pubs, they couldn't have other businesses.
they couldn't vote either. As soon as you join the police force, across all the forces that I've looked at, they were disenfranchised, because any kind of political affiliation, inclination, leads to partisanship, and partisanship leads to lack of partiality on the job. So, I mean, lack of impartiality makes you partial, and you can't fulfill your duties with zest and what was the other one? Rigor or whatnot of that was expected from the men. You could be a Freemason, though. That's pretty much the only thing you can do.
Might just have time for one question. Does anyone have a burning question for the panel?
I'm just interested, Anastasia, how you, from all of the police that you had available to you, how did you narrow it down to those ones that you selected?
Well, so far I've estimated them to be 128 men, and I've been mainly randomly selecting 5 from each category, and I have no particular scientific method to it, because the sample is too small to try and do any kind of randomized sampling trials, and I did not fudge it so I could find the records. It's just where the evidence takes me, and I do look at did he make it through the war? Did he not make it to the war? Was he did he have to resign? Was he granted leave? So that's dictated by, I guess, by the memorandum of 1915. But yeah, it's pretty much, this name looks good because I have that handwritten list at the beginning in the first slide, and it's like, I've already had a B, I'm gonna go for a D. I've already had a D. Oh, this looks interesting. Let's see where that's gonna go.
You mentioned the memorandum of 1915 where they're told they can no longer enlist. Is that ever lifted in 1917, 1918 when the AIF is actually desperate for men?
No, I haven't seen a memo coming through because there weren't many new recruits, and with the influx of forces into Brisbane, the men were in demand, and that's why across a number of forces, that's the first time women are recruited as auxiliaries, just to fill in the ranks, to bolster the sort of foot policing, really. So no, I haven't seen it.
Well, afternoon is calling. I think everyone has that sort of feeling like a cuppa. So if the speakers and the fellows, could I just get a round of applause again for their contribution? And I'm sure if you've got follow-up questions, they'll be more than happy to talk to you on the platform.